Okay, we are going to do a couple of slightly more ambitious things a bit later on, but for the moment, it's just a straight PowerPoint. Academics like having complicated topics, so that's the original one. This is a better one, which is much closer to what I want to talk about today with you. COVID-19, we're right in the middle of the thing. It's messy, it's confusing, it's got an uncertain future. And frankly, I think we are deafened by a barrage of facts, events, personal memories and experiences. And so what I want to do today is to do what linguists do, which is to look at the language of COVID-19 and see if we can make sense of it, but in a rather bigger context. Languages can be like archaeology, because if you live in a community, the teacups and things that you leave behind can be absorbed by the ground on which you live, and it becomes part of your record, which others will dig up later on. Language does the same. It leaves traces of civilizations and trends and people's interests and preoccupations. And so one of the things I hope we'll be able to do today is to say something about the legacy of COVID-19 and to interpret some of what it's on about. I won't be political, I won't be factional. I'll be as objective as I possibly can and concentrate on the science, the values and ideology, and the social response and action that's happened with COVID. Just to get a few basic things sorted out first: science, values and ideology, and the social response. Science itself is descriptive, analytical, and theoretical, and basically investigates phenomena in our universe. Values and ideology are the social and religious parts of the context, and they're always interpreted, at least partly, by language. I'll show you about various sorts of social and religious context in a moment. And finally, there's a social response and action. What happens when science is actually taken into society and made to work? Various things can distort all of this, I'm afraid. Part of it has to do with public discourses, and politics can get in the way, economy can get in the way, business can get in the way, religion can certainly get in the way, as we'll see in a sec. And a lot of people expect that science is going to be somehow infallible. That's entirely wrong. Genuine controversy is part of the way science is, and science is always looking for ways in which it might be wrong. And so it's part of the business about COVID that we don't actually have a completely clear idea about what it's on about. I want to start by giving some examples of the way in which over history science has sometimes been bent or perverted by various influences. First one is this happy-looking gentleman, that's Galileo, who picked up an idea from the Polish astronomer Copernicus that in fact the Earth was not the center of the universe, but the sun was, the heliocentric model. The Inquisition didn't like that because this wasn't what was in the Holy Book, and they put him through the hoops and eventually forced him to recant and locked him up for the rest of his life in house arrest. It is said that at the end of his trial, he quietly said in Italian, "Eppur si muove," which means in Italian, "but it does move," meaning that the Earth was in motion around the sun, and his accusers were wrong, as we know nowadays they were. Second example is a particular hero of mine, a man called Semmelweis, who was a Hungarian physician in the middle of the 19th century. He was a specialist in childbirth and mothers who had just given birth. And he was very worried by the fact that in Vienna at the time, it was evident that there were two big lying-in hospitals where mothers came to give birth. One of them had a mortality rate of women of 10%. This is women who got infections and so on after childbirth and died. Another ward had a mortality rate of 4%. And he had a look at these two and realized that in the first one, doctors were working, in the second one, midwives were working. And in the first one, the doctors were conducting investigations on cadavers, and in the second one, of course, the midwives were not. And so he realized that possibly there was something in the cadavers which the doctors were transferring to the women, which was causing them to get sick and die. And he had the doctors wash their hands in a mixture of chlorine and water. The mortality rate in the new ward now went down to 1%. But I'm afraid the medical profession of the time didn't like this. They didn't like Semmelweis telling them what to do, and they were extremely agitated about it. The whole thing made Semmelweis, this is a lovely phrase, it made me so miserable that life seemed worthless. Well, he saved the life of a large number of women, frankly, and as a result, he eventually had a mental breakdown. They put him into a mental home where he was beaten up by the guards, got septicemia, and died 2 weeks later. He was right. He was right a little too early. If he'd waited 20 years, Louis Pasteur's work would have shown him exactly how it was that he was right. Hang on, I've got a slight problem here. Here we go. Third one is our friend Charles Darwin and the Origin of Species in 1959. I've also put in Alfred Russel Wallace, the gentleman on the right. Wallace and Darwin both discovered the principle of evolution by natural selection. But Darwin got his big book in first. And so Wallace, who labored all his life on this one, tends to get left out. If you want facial hair, go for an evolutionary biologist. What happened in 1860 was that they had a big debate in Oxford about the origin of species and whether natural selection or the Bible was right. And among the people arguing the case were the philosopher and scientist Thomas Huxley on Darwin's side and Bishop Wilberforce on the other. And Bishop Wilberforce asked Huxley, would Darwin prefer to have for a grandparent, was it on his mother's side or his father's side? And Huxley said if he was going to choose a grandparent, he'd prefer to have an ape rather than Bishop Wilberforce. They don't make scientists like that anymore. Second last example is a particularly nasty man called Lysenko, who was an agronomist in the Soviet Union in the 40s and 50s, and who believed that plants could pass on things that they had acquired during their single lifetime to the next generation. In other words, he actively denied Mendel and genetics and all of Western science, and was strongly supported by another nasty person whose picture you'll see on the wall on the right, Stalin. 3,000 bona fide scientists were either deprived of their jobs, sent to Siberia, or maybe quite a lot of them died there. And Lysenko was a particularly evil scientist, but science hit back. And this is what Sakharov, the Nobel Prize winner for physics, said about him at the Academy of Sciences in Moscow in 1964. He is responsible for the shameful backwardness of Soviet biology and genetics in particular, for the dissemination of pseudo-scientific views, for adventurism, for the degradation of learning, and for the defaming, firing, arrest, even death of many genuine scientists. Science can strike back, and it did. And here's another one, the last one, smoking. In 1964, the US Surgeon General produced his report about the health consequences of smoking. Immediately, the smoking lobby started funding research to show that cigarettes weren't the only thing that caused lung cancer. Well, all right. Okay, let's get onto hang on, the whole business about COVID. It's a bit of a mess. A large number of people have followed the science and the medicine and believed what it was all telling us. But there's another group who've challenged the science. One group of people says it's actually a communist plot. COVIDism is communism. There's a group who thinks that the G5 system is giving us COVID. There's another group that thinks the anti-vaxxers are onto it, and they think that COVID is in fact a way of trying to force them to have inoculations. Out of the White House, we've got, first of all, the idea that it was the Democrats that had done it, then foreign influences, then the media, then the WHO, and then the Chinese, who were supposed to have somehow invented the thing in a lab in Wuhan. And of course, the President Trump has been having verbal spouts with Fauci, who is the senior medical officer in the US. And we've heard stories about taking bleach and ultraviolet light and hydroxychloroquine to fix you if you get it. Well, now the third group is actually challenging an important lesson of history, because in 1918, there was a Spanish flu, and we'll get to that in a sec. There was a rally in Philadelphia of 200,000 people, and a week later, they had more than 20,000 infected with Spanish flu. The city of St. Louis heard about this, and they shut the city down. And as a result, they had half the number of deaths that were found in Philadelphia. These things are a matter of public record. They should be part of the public discussion, and in very few cases have they actually been brought out. Okay. What about the reaction to COVID? Well, some of us at the start had the impression that our leaders were making it up as they went along, and I'm afraid to some extent that was partly true. On the other hand, my son, this is M. Sussex, did a paper about this in Policy Forum, which you can get hold of if you want, with some not very subtle advice for politicians. Don't obfuscate and don't lie. There were some terrible porkies in the early weeks of COVID. Political capital is temporarily worthless. In other words, don't play politics, and our leaders quickly got that idea. Choices have consequences, and we need to explain what we are doing and why. We need to adjust policy to meet weaknesses, so that if there's a shortage of testing kits, you say so, and you go about getting some more. No buck passing. There was some bad passing of the buck between the federal and state people over the Ruby Princess, which took a while to sort itself out and wasn't very enlightening. Politicians are meant to lead by example. You do not get in your car and go 500 miles away when you're meant to be an example. People need to see plans of action and trust them. People need to be informed. And finally, we need to have proper visibility about what's happening. Now, that's common sense. And I want to follow this through in terms of the language that's gone with COVID and what's happened to it in terms of 5 topics. First of all, inclusive language. Second, how we've all become number junkies. Third, confusing keywords which have been used. Fourth, slogans, which is a lot of fun. And finally, the odd fact that among the most successful countries in dealing with COVID have been Asian countries who follow Confucian values and Australia and New Zealand. Here we go. Inclusive language. I have been receiving through the post and through email and various other sources a vast variety of material from places like banks and so on, where they're using language like we and our and for you. We're there for you, they say. Well, I hope the bank is there for me. It's where I put my money. But they are very much into unity and cohesion. In other words, we have a common purpose, and the government and the public service and the community and private enterprise are all locked in a happy song together. Sometimes they've used words like Queenslander for unification. We're all Queenslanders together. Sometimes it's been as a way of holding other people out. The Premier said, Queenslanders will decide who is going to be let into Queensland. And of course, the phrase that we're all in this together, which has been picked up, by the way, in Canada as well as a national slogan for this business, even though CBUS, of course, already uses it. Now, I had the following document from Urban Utilities. And Urban Utilities says to me, we're here for you. Well, very nice. But look at these things that I have put rings around. These are the words which indicate, if you like, solidarity. We're here for you. Our priority during these difficult times remains the health and well-being of all right? And all the time they're emphasizing the idea that they are a part of, I suppose, a leader in the bringing of harmony into the community. Maybe, but it's interesting that so much of this language is coming from so many places. Second, we become number junkies. People have been following graphs, and particularly logarithmic graphs, even though they didn't know what logarithms were. And we've been going around muttering as we weed in the garden, flatten the curve. We understand what R0 is, which is the doubling rate. If R is 1, it means that one person transmits the COVID thing to another person, and as a result, it keeps on going. If you get your R0 number below 1, it eventually dies out. So that's what we've been trying to do. And for the last few weeks, Australia's number has been well below 0, below 1 and falling. The trouble is that with the graphs, numbers aren't all the same. People do tend to count deaths. Now in Belgium, they're counting people who die of COVID in hospital, and people who die in aged care of COVID, and people who die at home who are suspected of having COVID, even if they haven't got a confirmed diagnosis. As a result, Belgium looks as if it's got the worst death rate from this in the world, and people are saying there must be something wrong with their public health. Not at all. Next door, the Netherlands are only counting hospital deaths. And of course, various people around the world, mainly politicians, have been using these numbers to say, my country is a lot better than that country. Well, they're comparing deaths against what? The testing rate, but that's different in different countries. They test to different depths, to different distributions, and frankly, with different openness of reporting. So that one way and the other, the numbers we've been looking at are somewhat rubbery. But this is what they look like. This is one of these logarithmic graphs. You'll see up at the top that the United States is in not a nice place. Australia is more or less hidden in the middle here. And this is a few weeks ago. We have now flattened the curve and are heading like China resolutely horizontally. But these have become a major feature of our morning fix on the news. And we wanted to see where we were in relation to other countries and where the graphs were going. They are important, but they're only part of the story. Because behind all of this is a vast interplay of words. And I think some of them have been particularly confusing. The word isolation itself, for example, it's been interpreted as being, first of all, self-isolation for people who are over 65 or who are indigenous and over 60 or who have already existing medical conditions. But then they used the word for people who were required to be on their own at home, not going out because they'd been diagnosed. And it was clear that sometimes there was punishment for non-compliance and other times there was not. The word quarantine was used. Quarantine, by the way, comes from Italian quarantino, which means 40. In Venice in the old days, when a ship arrived from a country that had the plague, it had to anchor out in the roads for 40 days until it was proved that it no longer had plague on board. Then there was this phrase, social distancing. We're all in this together. I think that's a dreadful phrase, and the World Health Organization and the American Medical Association agree with me. It should be physical distancing. Keep your 1.5 meters here, 2 meters in Britain, fine. But as far as social things go, we need to try and be reinforcing of our social co-owning of the space. And when you see people, you need to help make them feel that they're welcome and you like seeing them there. And of course, there's the whole business about closed and open borders. If I've got it right, New South Wales and Victoria haven't closed their borders. Everywhere else has. And there's been a lot of rhetoric about this, particularly now when they're starting to talk about air travel again. In addition to all of that, we have slogans. A slogan is a short, pithy bit of language which is used to encapsulate a piece of wisdom, advice, or social order. And these are the ones which have been buzzing around our heads for the last 2.5, 3 months. Stay home, save lives. Stay home if sick. Shelter in place, that's an American one. Lockdown, used in some places which are more inclined to be physically imposing this. Isolation and quarantine. So those are all related to the home domain, if you like. Then there's a distance pair, keep your distance and social distancing. There's the hygiene ones, wash your hands, don't touch your face. We heard a lot about that during the first 2 weeks. It's fallen out of view entirely now. And then catch your sneeze, cover your sneeze, ideally in your elbow or some other suitable part of you. And finally, they're the social ones, flatten the curve, stop the spread, and herd immunity. Herd immunity is being pursued in Sweden, the idea being that sooner or later there will be enough people in the community who've had it, who will have antibodies and won't get it anymore and won't pass it on to anyone else. Unfortunately, the Swedes have found that their death rates are much higher than they anticipated, and this one is currently very much uncertain as to whether it works or not. But those are slogans, and they're the ones which have suddenly become part of our everyday life over the last, I think, 10 weeks or so. How do you make a slogan work? It needs to be simple. It needs to be repeated. It needs to be sticky in memory, something that you're going to not be able to get rid of. It's an earworm and is consistent. In 1972, Gough Whitlam had its time. That was a great one. It was short. It was very much to the point, and he used it as a kind of standard to carry the election. Don Chipp in 1980, keep the bastards honest. Only in Australia could you have a political party that uses the words bastards in a political slogan. Certainly wouldn't happen in America. The communists had solidarity of the party with the masses. There was supposed to be some mystical unity until the Poles hijacked the word solidarity and used it as a means of bringing the whole thing down. And of course, the Nazis were extraordinarily good at slogans. Arbeit macht frei, which is work makes you free, over the door of Auschwitz, which was downright awful. And ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer, which is one people, one country, one leader. These in Nazi Germany in the 30s and early 40s were thrown at people all the time. And as a result of that, eventually, a lot of people came to believe them. Here's what the Brits did. Every time a government minister got up at the podium, there was a label on the front. You'll notice that the label looks a little bit like one of those signs when there's been a road accident. I'm not sure whether that was deliberate or not. But stay home leads to protect the NHS, leads to saves lives. Interestingly, in Australia, we didn't have any slogan relating to protecting the health system. NHS is the national health system. But this is their first version, and they used this quite consistently when they finally worked out that they needed some slogans for about 2 weeks. And then they changed their minds. The new version was stay alert, control the virus, and again, save lives. Great. This time the thing has turned to green. I'm not sure if that is significant, but at least you've got two people of different genders giving the message. The message, however, was not always so well communicated. And this was one of their, if you like, champions of COVID, who was a champion in a way he didn't quite anticipate. And this is what they were trying to push at people. Because if you're going to stay alert, what do you need to stay alert about? Well, we can all help control the virus if we all stay alert. This means you must stay home as much as possible. Will someone kindly define possible? Work from home if you can. What if I can't? When can't I? Limit contact with other people, at least that's straightforward. Keep your distance if you go out 2 meters apart where possible. Where might impossible be allowed? And wash your hands regularly. And of course, the one at the end about being in the house and don't leave the home if you or anyone else has symptoms. So there were many messages on different levels with different complexity, and some of them worked and some of them I don't think were really so good because there was just too much. The Scots got it right. And Bill, relax, I'm not going to play Janie Godley. For those of you who haven't heard her, she's a Scottish comedian who does voiceovers over Nicola Sturgeon on The Lady in Red on the Right, who is the very cluey First Minister of Scotland. And you'll see the Scots have got two fairly simple messages. Stay at home on the podium, and behind her, what is in fact test and protect. And that's clever because you've got a little rhyme, test, protect. It's something which is very, very easy. Stay at home and test and protect. And if you put those two together, that's not a bad way of making things happen. Right, now I'll just play it for you. Let me explain. This is a man called Grant Stott. He's a well-known, it says I'm unable to connect to Zoom. I hope that's not right.
No, we can see it. So please.
He's a BBC Scotland broadcaster. This is Edinburgh. And they've done a song which actually incorporates most of the important slogans. And I think this is rather clever. Here we go.
Yes, we can see that well.
Righto.
Save lives. That's what lots of people say. You're stuck indoors in April, locked down in May. But I know I can't go and change this tune. If I want to get back outside in June. Stay safe, save lives. And as stupid as it may seem, some wee Egypts get their kicks, not day in the quarantine. So don't you bother heading uptown. Because we can't go there no more. Because it's closed down. Can't go to the pub or the beaches park for a picnic or play pitch and putt too. can't see the boys for a berry, so now we stay in and get pished on Zoom. Each time I find some rats wandering about on the loose, I pick myself up and shout, "Get back in the house! Save lives!" I tell you, you can't deny it. Next time I see a bottle of sanitising hand gel, man, I'm gonna buy it. And don't even think about jumping in your car and driving to Ann Struthers' award-winning fish and chip bar, unless you're local, because that's different. Don't go to the football, the boozer, the bingo, the chippy. We can't do a damn thing. I've been stuck in the house, binge-watching episodes of Tiger King. Each time I find some raj, taking too much Bondro off the rack, I pick myself up and shout, "Hey, ball bag, put it back! Save lives!" And you can't deny it. Just stay 2 meters away from folk. It's no hard. God, try it. And if we want to have a wee party come this here July, stay in. Only go out for essential food, health and work reasons. Your daily exercise, but don't be people from their households, and wash your hands. Protect the NHS and save lives. Come on, everyone, save lives.
Seems to me very much on the ball. The Wiggles have done one for our children, and I'll send that around to people through your offices, if I may. This thing, it's got the slogans, the important ones. It repeats them. By the way, a raj is Scottish for a stupid person acting irresponsibly. And it's done it in a musical way, which is attractive and which I think will reach out to lots and lots of people. And I think that this kind of thing is the way in which language, music, and public media can actually get together and do public health in a fantastically effective way.